So we've been hearing a lot about pardons during the January 6th public hearings. For example, we heard from Jared Kushner himself that he had his nose buried in a pile of pardons at the end of his father-in-law's term, trying to get out as many pardons as they could. So let's talk about presidential pardons, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kushner here. So we know the topic of pardons will come up again as the January 6th public hearings progress. And my good friend Kim Wehle just authored a great deep dive piece on pardons, and I want to use Kim's piece as a jumping off point for today's Justice Matters video, a discussion about presidential pardons. Here is the headline from Kim's piece: Trump's pardon abuses expose the myth of unlimited presidential power. And that article begins, one of the recurring themes of the January 6th committee hearings has been requests for presidential pardons by people who advanced Donald Trump's election fraud lies and attempt to override Joe Biden's unequivocal win. At the first hearing, Representative Liz Cheney, the vice chair of the committee, announced in her opening statement that Representative Scott Perry contacted the White House in the weeks after January 6th to seek a presidential pardon, and that multiple other Republican congressmen also sought presidential pardons for their roles in attempting to overturn the 2020 election. Now, Perry has denied requesting a pardon, but I'm quite sure Liz Cheney will be showing us the proof in a future J6 public hearing. So what do we know on the pardon front at this moment? Well, we know that John Eastman, Donald Trump's treasonous lawyer, one of them, requested a pardon, and we've been told that he was denied a pardon. And that makes some sense because he then was subpoenaed by the January 6th committee to testify, and he pled the Fifth. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. If he had a pardon, he probably wouldn't have been allowed to do it. It would have been perpetrating a fraud on the committee. It could have been obstructing the official congressional proceeding because his truthful testimony couldn't incriminate him if he had a pardon. He couldn't be prosecuted. So it makes sense that he requested a pardon because he is the author of the coup memo, had a coup for fun and profit, criminal attempt to overturn the election's results. So yeah, he requested a pardon. He didn't get one, so he went into the J6 committee and pled the Fifth. What else do we know? Well, we know that Scott Perry requested a presidential pardon. We know that other members of Congress, not yet named, a little bit of a cliffhanger there. They want to keep us tuning into the public hearings. I'm not mad at them. Other members of Congress have requested presidential pardons, and I guess we'll be learning who those people were and whether or not they received presidential pardons in the future. We also know, as I mentioned previously, Jared Kushner, out of his own mouth, said, I had my nose buried in a pile of pardons that we were trying to get out at the end of Trump's term. And he used that as an excuse as to why he couldn't be bothered paying any attention to White House counsel Pat Cipollone's threats to resign because of what Trump was doing to try to overturn the election's results. Jared said, look, I'm too busy getting all these pardons out to be bothered by your little trifling concerns. What else do we know? Well, we learned that Donald Trump offered Kellyanne Conway an unsolicited blanket pardon. This is an important data point because what Kellyanne Conway revealed in her book, no, I've neither bought it nor read it, but I did read the Washington Post review of it. She revealed that Donald Trump ambled up to her at the end of his term and said, these are her words, "Hey, honey, you want a pardon? Everybody needs one." An unsolicited blanket pardon. Kellyanne said that she politely declined. Who knows if that's true or not? Real facts, alternative facts, you never know with Kellyanne Conway. But if she is to be credited, Donald Trump offered her a pardon. So you think he offered pardons to his family members? Put a pin in that. That's some of what we know about the state of affairs regarding presidential pardons. What are some things we don't know? Well, we don't know if a secret pardon, a pocket pardon, is lawful or not, is constitutional or not. We don't know if a president can lawfully pardon a co-conspirator. Is that legal? Is it constitutional? We don't know if a president can pardon himself. Is that legal? Is that constitutional? We don't know the answers to these questions because they've never been challenged in court. There is no appellate case law. There's no precedent. Nothing from an appellate court, nothing from the Supreme Court saying whether these things are lawful or unlawful, constitutional or unconstitutional. I have my own opinions about these three topics, these three issues regarding pardons. For what it's worth, I think a secret pocket pardon is probably not unconstitutional, not illegal. I don't like it. I think it runs contrary to the sort of very purpose of the pardon power. But there's nothing in the Constitution that requires a pardon to be publicly announced, to be valid. There's nothing in the law that requires it. So I have a feeling that a court would not invalidate a secret pardon, a pocket pardon, but we don't know. Can a president pardon a co-conspirator? We don't know for sure, but I am pretty firmly convinced he cannot, that federal courts would strike it down as an invalid exercise of the pardon power. And friends, I hate to cite Bill Barr as an authority on anything, given the corrupt attorney general he was. But he does have a position on this that makes sense. He testified at one point that if a president issued a pardon in exchange for a promise not to incriminate the president, that would be a crime. And I think the same rationale holds true for a president who tries to pardon a co-conspirator. That would be a crime, and I believe the federal courts would strike it down. Can the president pardon himself? Again, there is no law on this. There is no appellate court opinion on this. But I think it's pretty clear that federal courts would also strike down a presidential self-pardon. Now, what there is, by way of authority on the question of a presidential self-pardon, is an opinion by the Office of Legal Counsel, and it was issued back in 1974. Here's how it reads. The DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel opined in 1974 that, under the fundamental rule that no man may be a judge in his own case, the president cannot pardon himself. You know, friends, that might as well be written on a cocktail napkin, because there's no authority supporting that summary pronouncement by the Office of Legal Counsel. There's no law. There's nothing in the Constitution. There is no appellate court opinion that stands for that proposition. I embrace it. I agree with it as a matter of principle. It makes sense. A criminal president can't possibly pardon himself. And I actually think Donald Trump probably has. I have every reason to assume, given the man he is, he was never one to give up or forego a good grift. He probably pardoned himself, and he's keeping it in his back pocket to pull it out if the time is right, if it becomes necessary, if he's indicted. But I firmly believe the Supreme Court ultimately will strike down a presidential self-pardon. The reason I say that is not because I have much faith or confidence in the Supreme Court's judgment these days, but I do firmly believe that the Supreme Court loves and covets its own power and its own authority. And if they were to decide that a presidential self-pardon is lawful, it's constitutional, it's good to go, well, then a president could commission a bunch of co-conspirators to go imprison the Supreme Court justices without cause, unlawfully, and then he could just pardon himself and all his co-conspirators while the Supreme Court justices sat in prison. And I guess if that case came to them to be decided while they were sitting in prison, they'd say, yep, all good. President can pardon himself and his co-conspirators. They won't do that. They won't rule that way, because then they would be making the president an all-powerful dictator, and they would be relinquishing their own power and authority, and the Supreme Court ain't gonna relinquish its own power and authority. But we don't know the answers to these questions because they have not yet been tested in court. So now that we've talked about some of what we know and some of what we don't know about the state of Pardongate, who has Donald Trump secretly pardoned, let's try to use some of what we know, some of the data points, to make some informed predictions. Did Donald Trump deliver secret pardons, pocket pardons to his family members? Well, we know he offered Kellyanne Conway a pardon without her even asking for one, without her needing one, according to Kellyanne Conway. If Donald Trump was walking around giving out pardons like Halloween candy, do you really think he decided not to give his children, his son-in-law, pardons? And there's another data point on the question of whether he may have pardoned his family members. This comes from some New York Times reporting that Kim Wehle quotes in her article about pardons. The New York Times reported in December of 2020 that Trump discussed with advisors whether to grant preemptive pardons to Giuliani, to Don Jr., Eric Trump, Ivanka Trump, and her husband, Jared Kushner. Friends, do you really think Donald Trump would forego exercising that awesome power, the power of the pardon, regarding his corrupt lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, and his adult children and son-in-law? Not likely. Another data point, we discussed John Eastman, Donald Trump's other corrupt attorney. He wanted a pardon, he didn't get a pardon, so he went in the grand jury, pardon the slip based on my career in the grand jury. He went before the J6 committee and he pled the Fifth, invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. You know who didn't plead the Fifth when they were subpoenaed to the grand jury? Rudy Giuliani, Don Jr., Ivanka, Jared. Doesn't that further support the inference that they had pocket pardons, so they couldn't plead the Fifth because their testimony couldn't incriminate them, and pretending it could actually be seen as obstructing that congressional proceeding, could have been seen as a fraud on Congress. So what now? Well, here's how Kim Wehle concludes her article about pardons. All that can be done now is wait and see if Garland indicts someone who manages to produce a pocket pardon. Then we would have to wait for the viability of that defense to make its way to the Supreme Court for resolution. But one thing is for certain. If somebody is indicted and if they magically produce a pocket pardon, that pardon must be challenged by the Department of Justice in court. We need to litigate the issues surrounding corruptly delivered pardons, pardons of co-conspirators, pardons to buy silence, secret pardons, pocket pardons. prospective pardons, pardoning people before they're ever charged, blanket pardons. All of these things need to be litigated, because if they're not litigated, then the next aspiring dictator, the next corrupt president, will have license to do it all over again. So yes, anybody who is indicted and produces a pocket pardon, that pocket pardon must be challenged in the courts. Because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.